everybody. Welcome here to the Swiss Press Club, the Geneva Press Club, actually. I'm very pleased to have this presentation tonight, and to be able also that we can see the film of Mr. Badiucao. Badi, he told me just tell me Badi, tell my name as Badi, so Badi. Welcome to you. Welcome to also to all the rest of the people who are going to talk in this this evening. Before starting, I would like to ask you to sign our golden book, which is very important for sure. So if you can just, it's the right page. If you can sign here. Seriously? Seriously? Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we better make it before you start. So thank you for this. And I have the pleasure also to give you all one element, one little book of cartooning for peace. So just let me go around. So, but I won't be long, and we will start now with the film. And again, thank you to the International Service for Human Rights and Cartooning for Peace who organized this this session with the Geneva Press Club. Thank you very much, and I hope you have an interesting film.
Chinese artist Badiucao, who disguises himself out of fear of reprisals from the Chinese government, has called on people all over the world to recreate the image.
The single biggest national security threat is China.
This would be a kind of test, a first time that my work actually entering a Chinese territory. We shall see the reaction from the Chinese government.
You've got to make a decision about the exhibition. Yeah, what's going on?
Buddy is fucking terrified. I don't know his name or who he is. I've never...
No. And neither do we.
So, welcome everyone. Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Badiucao. My name is Sarah Brooks, and it's my pleasure to moderate this event, a conversation about how we can uphold freedom of expression with three inimitable artists. So we have Andy Cohen, documentary filmmaker, Badiucao, an artist and activist, Australian-Chinese, and Geneva's very own Herman, working at Tribune de Genève. I'd like to begin also by thanking our co-sponsors for this evening. Is this better? So to the Geneva Press Club, to Cartooning for Peace for making this possible, but also to all of my colleagues at ISHR who were able to help bring this together. Christine, Fanny, Diego, Cédric, and above all, Raphael. It's incredible to be supported by such a phenomenal team. We've just seen the trailer for the film China's Artful Dissident by Danny Ben Moshe. This is Badiucao's film also. It's his story. But I wanted to kind of walk us through the remainder of the evening. So we will move as soon as I finish the obligatory introductions, to a bit of a sneak peek at Beijing Spring, which is a new project that Andy is working on, again, interrogating these questions of freedom of expression, of political art. We'll then move into a conversation with the guests, a Q&A, and hope to wrap up by about 7:20, 7:25, at which point we'll take a brief break and then move to the screening of the full film. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear for everyone. But I also realized I should probably introduce myself a bit more. So the International Service for Human Rights, for those of you that don't know, is a not-for-profit based here in Geneva, working to support human rights defenders globally to be able to carry out their work more safely, with less risk, with less restriction, whether they're here at the UN or at home. In the framework of these relationships, we have the honor to support activists who are seeking to make their governments accountable, their communities safer and more empowered, our development more inclusive, and our planet cleaner and healthier. In my own work with defenders, focusing particularly on the Asian region, I've come to recognize that creative expression is an incredibly powerful tool for carrying this work out. In particular, we see an influx of art created around popular movements that uphold human rights, art specifically for public consumption and mobilization, online as well as off, shared across social media in a variety of forms. This art has evolved alongside, and in some cases, sorry Herman, almost replaced the traditional political cartooning in print media. But the other thing about all of these aspects, all these varieties of art, is that they're particularly sharp at reflecting to us parts of the world that we might not want to see, that challenge us. The deadly implications of restrictive migration policies, the inadequate response to the climate crisis, vast inequalities within our societies, and the dictators, autocrats, and populists who peddle in fear and dark futures. But the thing that art also shows us is they're afraid too. This fear drives dangerous trends of harassment, detention, disappearances, even killing of activists who simply wanted to express themselves, maybe to criticize the government, maybe simply to contest power. So in addition to traditional advocacy, our work to stand in solidarity with them, with artists, with filmmakers, with musicians sometimes. Badi and I were talking about Hong Kong musician Denise Ho earlier. This is really how we can help make their contributions visible, how we can ensure they can continue to call for change. So again, I'm pleased to be joined tonight on the panel one more time by the protagonist of China's Artful, Dissident and recognized cartoonist and performance artist Badiucao, by documentary director, producer, and also Geneva native now, Andy Cohen, whose film Beijing Spring focuses on the first efforts at protest art in the post-Mao period, and Herman, as I said, who works at the Tribune de Genève to keep all of us accountable and thinking about the ways in which power operates, even in a place like Switzerland. So with that, how about we catch a little bit of Beijing Spring?
文革结束，整个政治形势宽松的时候，就他们出来了，就大家在反叛文革，寻找一种新的一个艺术观念。它叫强调艺术是真实的， 是有人性的。
所以那个时候大家都觉得这个社会要发生一个新的变化，大家都努力促进这个变化。
我们正好也是年轻的时候，等于是一个密封的一个环境，开了一个缝。
We are very different from before, very new, like a revolution.
北京之春当时是思潮，所以我们决定要出来说话，不是我一个人，很多朋友啊，要把中国往民主的方向拉一拉。民主墙最早产生的时候呢，是很多上访的，就受到那些官员欺压呀什么的。
对王大明有些冤假错案，他们想平反，他们就挨那儿去发泄他们就是自己的感情。
有必要做一点什么事情，其实参与民主墙。那么后来很快就做了决定，就是做一个杂志，主要是有新的诗，有新的小说，可能还有一些新的摄影和绘画。
我们要想法去办一个杂志，就是尝试一下出版的自由。我们不是害怕被抓起来，我们是害怕担心杂志还没有印出来就被人给抄走了，就给查抄走了。
把今天印好之后呢，把每页，从那墙头一直贴到墙尾，很长一段，很长的一溜。
作为艺术创造，首先是对权威挑战。
觉得那是一个，我们想再开辟另外一个战场，完全是艺术的。我们认为呢，我们每个人都是一个星星，每个人都是一颗天上的星星嘛，都是有自己的自由，有自己的灵魂。
The stars broke the door down, and then people walked through that into a new world. There'd been nothing like that for 30, 35 years, ever. I think it's incredible what they achieved, the heroism that they showed, and enormous risks they took. They risked imprisonment, they risked being sent down to the country, all kinds of punishments.
但王克平的很多作品都是政治性非常强的，实际上是被禁锢的这种形象。
这沉默嘛，就是堵着嘴，不能说话。还有呢，眼睛不能让你看到的全面的东西，世界上发生的东西给你看，都是经过这个筛选的东西。不准言论，实际上就不准思想。中国人不能说话，不能自由的表达。
红卫兵她等于是一个年轻的女孩子，实际上也是拿着皮带的。等于是可能刚去打过人呐什么的。当时的镜子被打碎了，可能忽然看到镜子里变形的自己。
They started, got the idea, have a art show. National Gallery, this is a fence. All of the, it's not a wall. It's all of the metal fence. Perfect to hang the pictures.
我是也害怕也兴奋。有一些人，这是什么东西呀？有的人。
所以人们都第一是很震惊，第二很惊讶。
while, it's getting more and more the people, and it suddenly becomes a very big thing.
展览没有多长时间，好像就被警察这个捣乱。
都摘下来！没有人动。警官回头看一眼身后那一排，又喊：“都摘下来！这里不准展览！我告诉你们，不让展览就不能展。”
这样的日子里头，举行这样子的集会，我们是迫不得已的，我们是不能允许这种强权来强奸和镇压艺术的事情发生的。
只有一个信念，该做这个事情。至于被抓被杀，就不在我的考虑之列了。
江宁这个很勇敢，然后这个他站在这个民主，在这个墙头上拍照，
想拿着摄影机，这个把当时情况拍下来了，而且他是真是这个冒着生命危险。
在这个行进过程当中，我们可能要呼喊一些口号，有政治民主，要艺术自由。
但是到了六部口那儿，好多警察的时候都停住的时候，
同胞们，同胞们，
公民们，同胞们，
我们要向你们讲，你们在哪里？你们就是一个人，你也是一个人，我们都是人，我们都有说话的权利。
都用我们的画笔，用我们的刻刀去歌颂我们的祖国，去把他的所遭受的所有的那些个苦痛给他加以暴露。
So that was just a few glimpses, I think. But maybe I can ask everybody from the panel to come back up. And we'll get started. I think Andy gave us a really great foundation, thinking about history, thinking about how history in some ways repeats itself with variations on a theme. So the first question for the panelists, and I pass the mic around so we can all maybe weigh in, is about your own history. Why is it that you've chosen art as a form to be politically and socially engaged?
I mean, as an artist, it's very important to make your work sincere. And as a Chinese, when I grow up, the society was loaded with political restriction, with this kind of iron curtain that you don't really see what's going on in China. But also, maybe partially because my family history, that my family has suffered from this regime. In the very beginning, my great-parents, they are the first generation of filmmaker in China. And my grandpa got into trouble because of his movies. His work was called Poison Grass by the time. He was sentenced to a rural concentration camp in far west China. He died there. So a lesson that my family learned in China is being an artist is dangerous. But it also tells me that in my vein, I'm running blood of artist, and I want to be an artist. So it's very personal for me to use my art to address the human rights issues, to address my family history, the pain, via my pain, via my brushes. But unfortunately, it's very much like I'm repeating the tragedy of my family history, that me today are facing the same harsh consequence for my art. But I am not regret of doing any of those, because artist is the path that I choose for my life. And I have to lawyer to my choice. And to be artist means you have to speak freely. You have to test the limitation of freedom of speech. And for me, because I am a Chinese, I grew up in that environment. That's something which touches me deepest. That's something that I care the most. So naturally, I started to engage with my art, with all the taboos in China, which is about issues of human rights.
Yeah, it's very different to be an artist in China or in Switzerland. First question, am I an artist? I don't know. I'm a cartoonist. I liked journalism when I was a child, when I was young. And I was impressed by, for example, the editorials. But I didn't know if I could be an editorialist because I never knew if I was right. And I chose the humor, because you can tell something which means anything else. And for me, I was always doubting. And I decided to become a missionary of the doubt. I wanted that people ask themselves, I wanted questions, and that people question themselves. I don't like answers, and it's my way of doing cartoons.
So maybe we'll actually let you answer this. And the second one, Andy, particularly given your background, is what are the unique aspects you think that visual arts, and in your case filmmaking, has to build more awareness and more debate around questions of politics or questions of power?
So I try to get away with it, and I got a double whammy. So I'm like Herman. I document. I'm a journalist, and I document artists. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are artists. So, but I used the form of documentary because I used to write a lot, and I realized nobody was reading anything anymore. So to reach the next generation, like my daughter's generation, I figured it's more immediate and get them to watch something if it's more visual. So that's why I chose that form.
So we saw a bit of it kind of in both films, actually. So a film that focuses on 1978 and a film that was filmed in 2018. But trends of repression, harassment, risks that artists face carrying out their work, in this case particularly in China, but Badi, you don't actually work in China, and yet I think are still facing this. So I wanted to maybe ask about how this environment and various forms of censorship that you've encountered have maybe shaped either your approach to art or have shaped your art itself.
I guess I am one of the lucky artists who from China, but still having a platform to showcasing the subject or the scene that I care about. But for me, the difficulty is how do I get my art back to China when I'm not working in China? Given the censorship is happening in China, given the Great Firewall, which is the nickname for the major internet filter in China, how do I break the wall to sending the message via my art? It's very difficult, but it's still doable. One way that I try to adapt is kind of bridging between the very sensitive content. The content will be censored in China with very common and popular images or online means already existed. I guess the best example would be Winnie the Pooh's, the juxtaposition between Winnie the Pooh and Xi Jinping. So when a bridge was established in that fashion, it definitely creating a huge dilemma to the censorship system. The difficulty is if the censorship deciding to censoring something like Winnie the Pooh, people are not going to be silent about it. People are going to ask questions. How this lovely, unharmful, chubby yellow bear become a problem in China? It's this absurdity kind of destroying the censorship itself. So if the censorships decide to say, okay, then, well, because we're worrying about backslash, so we do not forbid Winnie the Pooh, then it cannot stopping me keep making the portrait combining Winnie the Pooh and Xi Jinping. And then the message will be delivered into the Great Firewall. Then the people in China will have an understanding of it. But also, within my art, I also want to talking to the other people around the world, which is showing the absurdity of the Great Firewall, of the censorship in China. And the visual language is very important. Within my cartoon, I actually tend to not use the dialogue bubble too much, because sometimes when you are addressing the language, whether it's in Chinese or in English, it could get lost in translation. But visual language has this spectacular magic to actually telling the same story regardless our culture backgrounds or our personal experience. So that is my approach to dealing with this situation.
And Andy, the same question to you, but particularly thinking about the kinds of collaborations and partnerships that you've built through your documentary filmmaking. What has been, maybe you can share some stories or experiences of the kinds of ways in which you've experienced censorship or sought to get around censorship in all its forms.
For a Westerner, it's not nearly as dangerous to work in China as it is for a local Chinese. But you do certainly play a cat and mouse game with the authorities. So what we do is when we were filming down in the countryside, I stuck out like a sore thumb, so I'd stay in the car, or I would stay in somebody's house. But even when we went to get outside shots, within minutes, the authorities were there harassing us. And I would be driven to the outskirts of town and told not to come back. But our Chinese cameraman and our driver have been harassed, similar to the way Badi was. Like our driver, they took the license plate number, went all the way up to Beijing and threatened his mother. So he gave up driving, and now he works at a restaurant. And then also our cameraman, who was very risky, had a lot of confrontations for his activism and his camera work, then posted a meme, just like Badi was saying, one little cartoon, kids can't believe he posted a cartoon, the guy's in jail. And then when we tried to see what happened in jail, then they put him into a psychiatric hospital, so he's got no rights and he's going to be there forever. So it's very risky, but that's the job. And you have a moral responsibility because your subjects are also at risk, so you don't want to put them in harm's way. So there's kind of two thoughts. If you shine the light on somebody like Ai Weiwei, who's in jail, or Ye Haiyan, it helped them get out. But if you shine too much of a light, then they can suffer more, you know. So we've had some issues with people in our films where they've suffered more. Eventually, things worked out well, but one, as I said, cameraman is still in jail. So those are all the risks of, filming. And then, of course, you're not allowed to show your stuff in China. They want to cut your neck off. So. That's it.
And Herman, I wanted to ask you maybe a slightly different take on this question. I knew you were very much part of the outpouring of solidarity and friendship and empathy following Charlie Hebdo. So I wonder if you can talk a bit about either that specific instance or the role of solidarity when artists elsewhere are threatened, are under attack. Why and how can the rest of the community organize and show that they're standing with them?
Yeah, it's interesting. How can I not be solidar with the people who were murdered in Charlie? I didn't like so much their drawings, I was not always okay with what they did. But it's excellent because I had to tolerate it. And you can tolerate just the things you are against. So they they teach me to accept what they did. And they did always something which was not always moral, but which was legal. So when they were murdered, of course, I was with them because they did what is permitted, what is allowed, and they were victims because of it. And I could be only solidar with what they did. But you know, I think cartoon is almost a synonym of solidarity. Because, for example, when for the 11/9, who was the hero of the solidarity? I would say the cartoonist, because we didn't do humor in these days. We just showed our sadness, and it meant we are we, and the humorists, the drawers, the cartoonists are creating something like tribes. It creates us against them, and I like this role to create a solidarity, to create a society which can laugh about something with everybody. It's the most beautiful role of a cartoon, I think.
I'm going to go off script briefly because, Buddy, you'd recounted a story that actually this reminds me of earlier today. So I wonder if you want to briefly talk about, just tell the story about how important it is sometimes to make people laugh.
Because, well, after the Hong Kong protests started about more than 100 days ago, I've been using my art trying to creating a visual journal alongside with the protest. In the very beginning of the protest, I did a lot of caricature of Carry Long in the way that I'm trying to empower people, the protesters in Hong Kong, to showing them that there is power in your hands and you can change this regime with your action. But after about 1 month, maybe 2 months, I started to have comment on my social media, on Instagram and on Twitter. From Hong Kong, the people are saying something like, "Wow, we haven't laughed for days, weeks, but your humor in your cartoon made my day." That's really lovely comment that I receive. But when I think deeply of all those comments, it reflecting the atmosphere in Hong Kong is getting much more heavier, that people's emotion is suffering from this very struggle that the protest was carried on for days and days, weeks and weeks, but the government just not address any of the demands from the people. It's very exhausting, it's very devastating, but art become a temporary escape for anyone who come across it, to giving a comfort to their minds. So now I trying to make more cartoon more interesting and adding more elements of humor, just so I can bring in more little joys to the people who are suffering and struggling within this marathon-like protest.
So you've kind of brought us to current events, which is a fantastic transition to my next question. I think from the perspective of an international NGO, we talk about this, we think about this all the time, but when we think about it as humans or as artists, the world really doesn't quite feel the same way as it used to, right? I mean, we're confronting a world with norms shifting, with populist leaders, with governments who maybe once championed human rights, suddenly stepping back, turning inwards, failing in some really critical areas. We also have a world where big tech effectively is stepping into the breach, is exerting influence on the ways in which people share, in which people create, in which people communicate. So kind of thinking about this, or just thinking about sort of your day-to-day lives, I wanted to ask you in particular, Badi, about maybe the one or two biggest challenges that you face currently in the creation of your art and in trying to amplify your messages.
I think I want to bring in this example that actually combining, let's say, the rise of the Chinese threat or the Chinese government threat with kind of this compromised value of big tech company. This year is the 30th anniversary for the Tiananmen Square massacre. About a month before the anniversary, I proposed to Twitter to create a special emoji that will, alongside with a hashtag called Tiananmen30. And the emoji design is the tank man itself. After a very long waiting, maybe 2-3 weeks, just maybe 1 week before the anniversary, Twitter company replied me to say that they cannot accept it. They don't want to do it because emoji is limited resources for them, and simply they cannot do it. But I do not really buying this reason or excuse. I would rather say that, because I think the real reason behind this rejection of the proposal is, although Twitter is banned in China, but Twitter's still receiving money from advertising. Let's say a company like Huawei or some of the national sponsored media like CGTN or CCTV. Now Twitter is kind of stopping the national sponsored media. But for a very long period of time, it's kind of major income from this end of advertising from China. So that is weakening their position, and that making them play along with the censorship from Beijing. And that probably is the reason why they reject my proposal of the tank man emoji. Because, well, in some of the cases, in the meantime, they would create emoji for, let's say, a pop star is releasing a new album. They would create a new emoji for it. Let's say if that's the final for NBA, they would create a trophy emoji for the NBA final game. But if it has come to human rights issues like Tiananmen massacre, they're suddenly saying, well, the resources are limited. We do not really have time or money or the technology to achieve that within a month's time. This is not acceptable, but this is also the reality that we're facing now.
You know, I got something to add to that, you know. And, you know, it's also suffering amnesia is the West. It's not just the East, you know. And a perfect example is Switzerland. I mean, most people don't realize it, but Geneva right here was the first experiment in Europe of a totalitarian society, you know. And we totally forget. I mean, I walked down the stairs, I see Calvin just sitting up there all proud with his library, and he's a guy who basically censored the presses, you know, as well as, you know, created a lot of atrocities and destroyed art and took away music and took away pleasure and killed people at the stake, you know, cut their heads off and banished them. So we forget, it's just sitting right here, let alone what the Americans forget, what we did to the the Native Americans and everything. So that's that forgetting process is something I think every society has to grapple with in their own particular way. It's not as black and white as in China, because, you know, it's a one-party system, so it's kind of like we know who the bad guy is. In the West, it comes at you every which way, and like we were talking earlier, we have an obligation to not sit on our ass because we're not being hunted down, you know. So anyway, I forgot the question, but that was the comment.
Well, I mean, no, it's interesting because I was actually going to conclude by saying that the possibility that there may have been political calculations or economic calculations in Twitter's decision is actually not so far-fetched, because even here in Europe, we see European companies who are regularly apologizing to the Chinese state for having run afoul of what might be considered sensitive topics. So Mercedes-Benz, I believe it was, had run an ad with a quote from His Holiness the Dalai Lama and had to issue a public apology. Leica ran an ad that featured actually the braveness of the photographers who were capturing what was happening on Tiananmen Square. They had to issue an apology. I can think of countless fashion houses that have, in one way or another, mischaracterized certain aspects of what the PRC and the Chinese Communist Party see as its proper geography. And they've all apologized. So I think it is simply to say that I think it's not maybe such a far-fetched notion that there are a lot of concerns, a lot of censorship and self-censorship that comes into that. But anything else in terms of challenges? I know a lot of it is covered in the film that we can watch later, but maybe you can pick one story to tell.
I think, well, I'm really heavy on internet, so it's almost like use Twitter as Trump, but have very different political opinion, of course. So internet to me is essential. Like, I woke up, I have to have access to internet. But let me share this personal encounter of my internet security in Australia. I've received cyber attack in Australia, which stopped me having access to internet in Melbourne. It turns out, it seems like my IP address is targeted by a third party other than the internet service provider. Presumably, it probably was from Beijing or the people who are working for Beijing. So even in Australia, I will have to use VPN, which is a software that faking your IP address to get access to the internet. This is absurd, but this is happening in our world. Like, this is how easily the censorship can be exported, just like any of the goods made in China, to any of the corner of our world. And this is concerning.
About with Herman about censorship, like the cartoons now have become censored in the West because there's one. So I'm more old-fashioned because, like Herman, we have the big captions over the cartoons. You know, remember those old Batman ones? Pow, wham, boom. You know, it's very pop arty. And you don't use, right? You're so internet. Me, you can ask my daughter. I gotta ask her everything. You know. But there are ways also that you're getting censored with the internet. I'd like you to explain to the kids how they got censorship with that Charlotte cartoon in the New York Times, and how and what they decided.
Yeah, so kind of bringing us to how even this happens here.
Yeah. So no, we don't have the same problems you have, but we have a little bit luxury problems here. We have two forms of censorships. You have from above. We have the censorship from beyond. And our readers sometimes are angry against us. And for example, with the politically correct, it's getting harder to make cartoons. You know, we have to, the weak people know now they have rights and they want them to be respected. It's very, very good, but we have to deal with it. And I like it. We can't be the strong one who are always taunting about everything. We have to be very careful to respect the weak one. But it's sometimes difficult. For example, now it's difficult to speak about the women because they have seen that they are now becoming... what did they say, Tocqueville? It's the moment when things are getting more repressive. Less oppressive, that they are revolutions. During moments of reform. Exact. And the women are now feeling that their moment has come and they are strong against us. And for example, sometimes last week, a woman was angry because I drawed a prostitute who was vulgar. And I told her, but all the prostitutes are vulgar because if they don't, they are not vulgar, they can have no customer. But she was angry against me because of it. So I have to care about these people. And now the other problem is some newspapers fear this reaction. And it's the problem of the New York Times. After a drawing which was qualified of anti-Semitic, they excused themselves, but they stopped every cartoons, and they had 2 cartoonists, and one is an excellent cartoonist who is living in Geneva, it's Chapat, and now he has lost his job in the New York Times because of a drawing he didn't do, but because of the fear of the New York Times. And it's a problem. It's the new problem of our civilization now, this fear of the other.
So I think this is a really fascinating discussion on how do we find nuance and how do we get past a fear of the other and maybe move towards dialogue. And I want to maybe ask you, Badi, if you can speak a little bit about how you see your work as really contributing to building spaces for dialogue and for discussion, even about some really hard topics.
I mean, well, one of the very important thing for me to do art is because I come from China. I am not a foreign interference. I'm domestic interference. In this way that I think I certainly can open more space on criticizing China because I am not really controlled by anyone. I'm actually not hired by any media. I'm no editorial cartoons for anyone. I'm cartoonist online. So in that way, when I do artwork about China, I think it will be more convincing for the people who have doubts, for the people who would buy in the narrative of when CCP or the Chinese government is saying all the criticism against the Chinese government is controlled by CIA or some sort of the foreign body who have a hidden agenda trying to stop the development of China. So because I'm from China, I'm independent, so I could tell the people in China that, look, this is really our problem. This is really our government is functioning as a dictatorship. And it is also our responsibility to change it for the sake of our future. That's something that we can open the dialogue. But also, as in Chinese who are living in foreign country, that I very much seeing how the overseas Chinese population is manipulated by the Beijing force when Beijing is kind of controlling. For example, in Australia, probably I would say 90% of the media which is in Chinese language will be controlled by Beijing, which means they were following the same rules of censorship from Beijing. And the result of that is if the Chinese Australian only read news from Chinese media, then they did not really see the world. They're as if living in China, and that created a huge problem. So my art would definitely bringing there some fresh air to showing them the difference, but from a perspective of their own people. So, well,
maybe we can get into that for questions.
Yeah. That's a dessert.
You're getting ahead of us, Andy. But no, I do want to be sensitive to time and also allow our audience to ask some questions. So I'll actually start with you, Herman, Andy, and then Badiucao. What do you see in the future for your work? And what inspires you? What keeps you coming back to the drawing board?
We have an important role as cartoonists. We are soldiers, I think, of the freedom of the press, of freedom of thinking. And we have to be very sly and mischievous. When you see that something doesn't agree somebody, you have to make gags always to disturb the people, to disturb them till they accept to be disturbed. But you have always to find the exact way to disturb them. And if they hesitate between boxing you and laugh, you have won. After 1 or 2 seconds, they don't want to box you again. So you have won a little space of liberty. And it's the game of the cartoonist, of the humorist, always to disturb the people a little bit till they accept what they don't like. And now we are in a time when the liberty of thinking of the press is shrinking. And we have always to go to the boundaries, to the limits, to say, I continue to laugh about it, to taunt about it, and it's the way, I think it's the mission of our job.
Andy, what inspires you?
My daughter. When she says it's good. No. Also just the subject history, documenting, you know, interesting people, cutting edge people doing interesting things, treading new water, breaking new ground. So, you know, it's like, and documentary filmmaking is at the beginning. It's like, compared to other forms of art, it's like the genre can continue to grow. It's its infantile stage. So it's nice to be in that element, basically.
I want to address what you said about to find the space to kind of challenge people. I mean, it's really easy to be a cartoonist in China because the Chinese government do not like anything. So anything you said is agitate them. So I guess my job is much easier in that way. My inspiration is, at the moment, is the Hong Kong people. That every day they're showing me the definition of courage, of smartness, of resistance, that it urges me to do cartoon in a daily basis. I actually woke up 4 a.m. this morning to do a cartoon to address yesterday's massive protest, and also there is a high school student got shot by the real bullet first time in Hong Kong. So this is incident like that drives me to do works in a daily basis. If I can, I do 2 or 3 cartoons every day, because those people need to be heard for a broader audience. And now I have the capacity to help them to deliver the message to more people. So it's just something that I have to do. And it's something I hope more artists will join in doing it.
So some of you may have noticed there's a wall just outside the door with a bunch of Post-its on it. I'd like to invite everyone to consider looking at it as you leave this evening, not just yet, but in a few minutes. And Badi, I'd actually like you to explain to us a little bit about what that is.
So what you see out there is the form of this protest or expressions called the Lennon War. It's all originated in 1989 in Prague, when the people decide to doing graffiti on a Great War to showing their solidarity on what they believe to demand the freedom in their country. So Hong Kongers are adapting the same form, but change from the spray can, the graffiti style, into a new style by using the sticky notes, those colorful square notes. And this almost, I can say, it's the most iconic visual experience alongside a whole Hong Kong protest. And it has been used all around the world among the people who are supporting Hong Kong's protest as well. I actually super inspired by it, and I designed a flag, which is using the same idea of the Lennon Wall. So here comes the dessert that we talk about. So I've been taking this flag to all over the world. Wherever I'm traveling, I take it to Taiwan, to Washington, to other cities in Australia, but of course in Geneva. So yesterday I carried out a art performance, which I also travel with a ridiculously high flagpole. It's about 6 meters. But don't worry about it because it's IKEA style, so it comes with little piece. So I bring this flagpole with my flag to a lot of major landmarks in different cities. Of course, in Geneva, I'm gonna do it in front of the UN and also in front of your magnificent fountain in the lake. But unfortunately, I have two very unpleasant encounters with, I think, from Chinese tourists. Firstly, in front of UN with the broken chair, we've received numerous fingers, the middle fingers, from a very young Chinese couple. I tried to kind of talk to them, but they refused to really respond to me rationally, and they just went away after that. So I think this is the end of the story. One of that awful encounter is enough. But when we moved to the fountain, a bigger group passed me. They saying F words with Shanghai dialect. I believe they think maybe we don't understand. They assume we are Hong Kongers, so we wouldn't really know the Shanghai dialect. But unfortunately, I am born in Shanghai, so I know exactly what they're trying to say. I confront the guy who say that dirty words, and of course he's kind of surprised. But also, it's this unreasonable encounter. It's this random encounter all over the world, even after I'm, traveling thousands of miles after 25 flights from Australia to Geneva, and this is still happening. It's very mixed feeling for me. Firstly, it's very upset to have this happening. Secondly, it's very sad to see this happening, because I am Chinese. I come from the same place where they grow up. And I'm lucky enough to be immune to all the propaganda and manipulation. But those people, they are really, on one hand, they are the predators, they are the bullies. But on the other hand, they are also the victims, subject to this uncivilized government or regime. So, but that's my, well, I would still say it is meaningful encounter. At least they, from their perspective, they see something different from what they get used to see. And they come here not just for clear food, luxury brands, but also a piece of Lennon Wall flag.
All right, so opening it up to the audience for questions. I think we have about 10 minutes. We have one floating mic, I think, somewhere. Tobias? Yes, excellent. So if you would like to ask a question of any of our panelists, please go ahead and raise a hand and we can bring this over to you. Okay, Raf, I think Chen Wei.
Hi, as a Taiwanese living in Geneva individually, I feel deeply relevant to what you are doing, and good job on all the art you have made. And I think art is a form very important, and it goes beyond language barriers. As a Taiwanese, I observe a growing concern in Taiwanese society that the propaganda from Chinese society is coming, and a lot of Taiwanese, especially a lot of Taiwanese young people, they want to find a way to address this issue, and a lot of Taiwanese young people, they try to use art as a way to address that issue. And I think the art just get people to think. You don't have to say any words in the art, but you get people to think, and that's the reason for art. That's my personal take. So actually, my question is, facing an attack from the Chinese propaganda or disinformation or misinformation, how do you use your art to address this issue?
Firstly, very honored. I just visited Taipei a couple of weeks ago, and I feel like it's like a home feeling, because for my situation now, I can no longer really step into any of the territory of China. But thank you for Taiwan to preserve this rich culture of China, and also building your own identity beyond this old body of the culture. Back to your question, I think art, particularly like art engaged with humor and satire, is very strong combination. We do a lot of caricatures of leaders from China or from Switzerland or from any of the authority. It's naturally dissolving the authority when you are mocking them, when you're making them as Winnie the Pooh. So this is a way to telling people it is fundamentally okay to challenge the authority with the most interesting and light way. By having this very idea, it would be the beginning for people to questioning or challenging their old set of worldview. And it's like you have a great dam or a great wall, but you only need to it only takes a little gap or broken aspect to eventually destroy the whole damn building. So art could be the very beginning of challenging people's thought, to make them to think differently, to empower them, to give them the idea that, oh yes, maybe I can do that, to mocking Xi Jinping or Trump as well. So that would be my understanding of art.
Great. Any other questions from the audience over here?
Hi, so I'm a Hong Konger, currently studying in Switzerland. So I'd just like to start with personally thanking Mr. Bath for the great support since June, for expressing what's happening in Hong Kong through your arts. And I personally really appreciate it. So I'd just like to, I'm a little bit curious because it sparked emotions in Hong Kongers. We laughed at it. We had like this, as you said, temporary escape from the cruel reality we're facing in Hong Kong. So would you say you're trying to let the international community know about Hong Kong, or would you say that your art is more targeted towards Chinese in other foreign countries so that they really know about what is really happening in their own country? Thank you.
I think it's very important to go both ways. That's why, as I explained, I try to limit the language that has been used in my visual language. Because in that way, regardless if they're from China or from Switzerland or from Australia or from America, they all can understand what I'm trying to express. I think the situation now in Hong Kong is very critical. And for Hong Kong alone, it will be very hard to defend itself from Beijing's threat. So it's very important to have the support from the entire international community here, especially in Geneva, where we have UN here. It's definitely significant that we should have more support from global organizations like UN and from individual countries of the free world. Because ultimately, the free world have the obligation to defend each other because we all share the same value. What happened to Hong Kong might not just stop in Hong Kong. It can expand to the rest of the world, because really what China trying to do is introducing a new narrative, a new order of the world, which is quite different from the one that we get used to, which is celebrating democracy and freedom. That you don't see that in China. And in fact, they play the words, they create a new narrative, a new explanation of the very
definition of freedom and democracy. So when that happens, although we might still call it freedom and democracy, but it could mean entirely differently. And that's not the future that we actually want to live in, unless you want to be like me, that got your family in the authoritarian regime, got harassed all the time. So this is why Hong Kongers is trying to say no to China. And this is also why the entire world should join in Hong Kong in defending Hong Kong, just so we have a much clearer understanding of the hidden agenda behind the Chinese government.
Right, I think we have time for one more question or comment. Yep.
So I also live in Hong Kong and I'm a student here. And when I went back to Hong Kong in the summer, I had a lot of interactions with people from mainland China who said that they didn't understand why Hong Kong was still fighting for something that they knew they couldn't have, or that they would lose by 2047. And I just wanted to ask, with your interactions with people from China, were there any points in your discussions with them where they kind of saw you, what you were saying, or understood the Hong Kong's like mentality of what they're doing?
I mean, for the mainland Chinese, it's really hard. You have to read it alongside of the history of China. The persecution or the intimidation did not just happen today. It has lasted for 70 years. So with that history, the generation that we have now is very much influenced by it. People have become more practical in a way, because all the political space has been shut down in China. And the only way that you can make a good life is making money. So that's why you hear a lot of mainlanders saying they only care about making money. It's kind of pathetic, but also because if they dare to talking about political issues, they will be ended up in the jails or even just evaporated from their society. But I still have hope to influence the mainland Chinese, but it would take a time. It would take a very long time, but it's worse to fighting in that way. We are competing with 70 years of persecution. The whole population is traumatized. It's a result of this brutality. And it needs a lot of love, care, including feelings, to hearing discourse, to making Chinese, mainland Chinese, prepare a more open mind. But in Australia, I can share this. In Australia, the Hong Kong community are organizing rallies echoing with the demonstration in Hong Kong almost every week. And time to time, we have mainland students will join us. I have a couple of conversations with most of them. A lot of them came to me to say, whispering, we are supporting Hong Kong, but we're worried that we might be into trouble, that because we know someone is watching us. This is in Australia. And they were hiding in the very back of the rally, but they came. They came with a mask, they came with a cap, but they came. That's the most important thing. And that's showing the possibility of hope that in the future. But in the meantime, I do hope countries like my second home, Australia, were giving more protection and information to Chinese Australian, to Chinese students in Australia. And this should be applied to any of the country around the world, in our free world, to giving platform to them, to giving protection to them. And gradually, I believe they will be changed and they will prepare their open minds.
That's a fantastic way to conclude. So thank you from myself and from ISHR to all of our panelists. And thank you to all of you for showing up and for being part of this dialogue. So we'll have a brief break now. Go ahead and set up the screening. But if you'd like to chat with any of the panelists, I think I'll just invite them, if that's okay with them. to be in the back of the room if you'd like to come by or if you have any questions you didn't have a chance to ask. But one more time, to the Club Suisse de la Presse, to Cartooning for Peace, thank you immensely for supporting us and for allowing us the space to start the discussion.